They told you to dream big, to hustle harder, to chase success like your life depended on it. But nobody warned you what happens when the dream starts chasing you. When every motivational quote feels like a quiet accusation. When success becomes another mask you wear, and you're exhausted from holding it up. You wake up tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of pretending that everything is under control. You scroll through other people's lives and wonder how they make it look so easy. But deep down, you feel it. Something's off. The promises of self-help, the endless productivity hacks, the perfect morning routine, they didn't work. Not really, not for you. Maybe the problem isn't that you're broken. Maybe the problem is that nobody ever taught you to fail. On purpose. To stand still in the storm. To ask hard questions when everyone else is running from them. What if everything you've been avoiding, the burnout, the frustration, the doubt, is actually trying to show you the truth? In this video, we're not going to sell you a solution. We're going to walk through the fire together, through the illusion of control, through the collapse of identity, through the pain of wanting more, and the courage to accept less, and finally make it mean something. Slavoj Žižek doesn't offer hope wrapped in a smile. He offers a mirror. And if you're ready to look into it, you might just find something the system was never designed to give you. Yourself. Take a breath. Let it land. Because by the end of this video, you won, and just understand why the world feels like it's falling apart. You will understand how to stand inside the chaos and not flinch. You ever notice how dreaming about change feels almost better than changing? You sit there, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., picturing the life you could have. You imagine quitting your job, moving to a quieter city, becoming someone who wakes up early, reads books, eats better, lives slower. And for a second, just for a second, it feels like you were actually doing it. That feeling, it's addictive. It's not about the achievement. It's about the fantasy. And that's what Slavoj Žižek calls surplus enjoyment. The strange satisfaction of wanting something more than having it. You don't need to buy the thing. You just need the dopamine hit of believing it could one day be yours. Look around. We're surrounded by half-finished dreams. Bookshelves full of unread self-help books. Gym memberships that were inspiring for exactly 2 weeks. Vision boards that quietly collect dust. We don't live in the future. We live in the possibility of the future. Because it feels safer there. There's no failure in the future. Just potential. Zizek didn't write for the elite. His ideas hit differently when you're working 2 jobs, barely paying rent, and still being told to visualize abundance. When you're stuck on the treadmill of life, sometimes the illusion of movement is the only comfort you've got. And that's exactly what surplus enjoyment feeds on. It's not your fault. The system is built to keep you in this state. Online, you're sold an endless stream of improvement. 10 ways to fix your life. 5 steps to change your mindset. 1 morning routine to become successful. But here is the thing they done to say out loud. If the process actually worked, the system would collapse. Because the real profit isn't in your success. It's in your search for success. They sell you the pursuit, not the outcome. They feed your desire so you never stop craving. Zizek saw this, and he didn't just write about it. He warned us. We've built a culture where the dream is more valuable than the reality. You're not addicted to laziness. You're addicted to the emotional high of imagining change. And who wouldn't be? It's painless. It requires nothing. No risk. No real consequence. It's much easier to fantasize about quitting your job than to sit your boss down and tell them you're redone. It is easier to pin quotes on your wall than to face the part of yourself that does not believe you will ever change. And let's be honest. Sometimes, chasing the dream feels like the only part of the day that belongs to you. The rest is noise, obligations, bills, pressure. The fantasy? That's yours. It's the only thing they can't touch. But here's where it gets dangerous. The longer you stay in the fantasy, the more reality begins to rot. You keep making plans you never act on. You keep talking about what you'll do when you finally have time, when you have energy, when you have money. You become a master at postponing your own life. And slowly, without noticing, the dream starts to feel like a lie. That gap between who you are and who you wish you were, it widens. And one day, you wake up and realize you're tired of chasing. You're tired of pretending. But by then, you don't know how to stop. That's not laziness. That's despair with good branding. So what do you do with that? You start by seeing it. You look at your rituals, the apps you scroll, the lists you write, the promises you make to yourself before bed, and you ask, am I chasing something real? Or am I just addicted to the chase? That question alone can shake something loose. Because the truth is, some of the most productive people are just the most skilled at hiding from their own emptiness. That's what makes this topic so uncomfortable. It's not about success. It's about the story you've told yourself about what success will finally fix. Maybe it is time to stop building the fantasy version of your life and start getting intimate with the broken, awkward, unfinished version you're in. Because that version, that's where the gold is. That's where real movement happens. Not in the clean, curated image, but in the mess, the debt, the doubt, the everyday hustle that never seems to end. Zizek wasn't interested in polishing human experience. He wanted us to look at the dirt and find meaning there. And if you dare to look at your own patterns with that kind of honesty, you start seeing the cracks in the fantasy. And cracks are how the light gets in. But let me be clear, noticing the trap doesn't free you from it. Awareness is just the first wound. The deeper work begins when you ask, what now? If the dream won't save me, what will? And that question, that terrifying, liberating question, leads us to something Žižek calls the courage of hopelessness. And if you're brave enough, that's where we go next. You've probably heard this before. Stay positive. Everything will work out. But what if that's the biggest lie we keep telling each other? What if the world isn't going to fix itself? And maybe deep down, you already know that. There's a strange kind of suffering in always waiting for the next thing to save you. The next election, the next job offer, the next partner. Žižek calls it the courage of hopelessness. Not because it sounds poetic, but because it's the only real starting point for change. And I know, it sounds brutal. Hopelessness as courage? But stay with me, because if you're stuck, exhausted, or quietly falling apart, this might be exactly what you need to hear. The problem isn't just the weight of life. It's the constant pressure to believe that life is supposed to get better, soon. Like if you just hustle harder, think more positively, stay grateful, things will finally click. But if you're working 2 jobs and still choosing between groceries or gas, you know the truth. Sometimes, the system is broken. Not just for you, for millions. Žižek's point isn't that you should give up. It's that you should stop lying to yourself about what's coming to save you. The someday dream is a drug, and waking up from it hurts like hell. But it also gives you back something no system can own, your clarity. You see it everywhere. People burning out not just from working too much, but from hoping too much. Hoping this year will be different. Hoping the burnout is just a phase. Hoping that self-improvement video will finally flip the switch. But the switch doesn't flip. Because the world keeps spinning in the same direction, and you're stuck in its current. That's why Žižek doesn't preach motivation. He doesn't hand out dopamine. He invites you to look around and say, maybe this is as good as it gets right now. Not to depress you, but to free you. Because once you stop hoping for the perfect moment, you can start acting in the one you're in. There's power in saying, I'm not okay, and nothing outside of me is going to fix that anytime soon. It's raw, it's terrifying, but it's real. And when you stop outsourcing your salvation to money, to partners, to promotions, something radical happens. You stop waiting. You stop begging life to be kinder. You start facing it with your feet on the ground and your eyes wide open. Žižek isn't alone in this. Think of Camus, or even Nietzsche, philosophers who saw the chaos and didn't run from it. This is where philosophy stops being theory and becomes survival. Not as an escape, but as armor. If you've ever sat alone on a lunch break, staring at a cracked phone screen, feeling like your life is circling the drain, this part is for you. That moment of emptiness, that is the gateway. Not to fake positivity, but to a deeper kind of power. The power that comes from having nothing left to prove. When there's no more mask to wear, no more pretending you're almost there. That's when you start moving from the inside out. Not chasing approval, not waiting for applause, but acting from something deeper. Something no job or algorithm can monetize. Žižek calls it lucidity, and it cuts through illusion like a blade. You can only live honestly when you're no longer addicted to hope. Because that kind of hope, the one that says, if I just keep pushing, the universe will reward me. It's not hope. It's denial wrapped in glitter. The world might not get better tomorrow. Your job might still suck. Your debt might still rise. But inside that honesty, you begin to shift. Not magically, not dramatically, but slowly. Grit in your teeth. Fire in your gut. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for the simple, defiant act of showing up anyway. That is the courage of hopelessness. And most people will never understand how sacred it is. This isn't about being cold or cynical. It's about choosing clarity over delusion. When Žižek talks about hopelessness, he's not glorifying despair. He's destroying the false promises that keep you stuck. He's saying, you've been lied to. By the system, by self-help, by your own fantasy of who you should be by now. And once you see through it, you can finally start building something real. Not flashy, not perfect, but yours. Because when you stop asking the world to heal you, you begin to realize, maybe healing was never the point. Maybe facing the wound is the work. And that brings us to something even more difficult to accept. Something most people run from for their entire lives. What happens when the identity you have built collapses? When the mask no longer fits? When the roles you've played stop making sense? When you realize you were not who you thought you were, and maybe never were to begin with? There comes a moment, quiet, sharp, and devastating, when everything you thought made you begins to fall apart. It doesn't always happen with a bang. Sometimes it creeps in slowly. A job loss, a breakup, a medical diagnosis. The realization that you've been performing for so long, you don't even remember what it feels like to act from truth. Žižek called it subjective destitution. That terrifying point where your old self dies and nothing seems to take its place. It's not poetic. It's not glamorous. It's like standing in a burning house, realizing you built it yourself, and you don't know how to get out. For most people, identity is armor. I'm a good employee. I'm a strong mother. I'm the smart one in my family. But what happens when life rips those labels away? When your role dissolves and your routines no longer protect you? That's when the real crisis begins. Not because you're weak, but because your sense of reality was built on sand. We live in a culture obsessed with branding the self, but Žižek reminds us, the self is often just a story we've told ourselves to feel safe. And when that story stops working, the silence is deafening. It's the single parent who worked 3 jobs only to realize her kids barely know her. It is the man who spent decades chasing status only to feel numb the moment he made it. It's the exhausted worker who poured everything into a job and got laid off without warning. This is subjective destitution in the real world, the collapse of meaning. And it's where many people break, or awaken. When the mask falls off, you're left with raw truth. No roles, no filters, just the echo of your own breathing. And maybe, just maybe, that's where something new can begin. But here's the catch. That space between who you were and who you re-becoming. It's brutal, it's lonely, and society offers you two easy exits. 1, numb yourself, scroll, shop, binge, pretend the void isn't there. 2, rebuild your old mask. Get a new job title, a new aesthetic, reinvent yourself. But only on the surface. What Žižek urges is something most people won't dare do. Stay in the emptiness. Stay in the ache. Stay in the place where you no longer know who you are, and don't rush to fix it. Because in that discomfort, there's potential. It's like burning down a forest so something wild and true can grow. Not curated, not optimized, just honest. If your life feels like it's crumbling, maybe that's not a sign of failure. Maybe it's a sign that the structure you built was too small for the truth of who you re-becoming. But nobody tells you that when you're crying on the kitchen floor. Nobody tells you that losing your identity might be the first real thing that happened to you in years. That's why this hurts, because it matters. Subjective destitution is not about giving up. It's about shedding illusions. And illusions die hard. They cling to your skin. They whisper that you're nothing without them. But that's the lie. You were never the job, never the relationship, never the salary. You are what remains when all of that burns to ash. And if you can stand in that ash, shaking, naked, uncertain, and still choose to rebuild, not out of ego, but out of truth, then you're no longer living someone else's life. You're finally starting your own. People often fear this collapse because they think it leads to madness. And in a way it does. The madness of being untethered. The madness of not having a label to hide behind. But Žižek would argue, that's not madness. That's freedom. Because the real madness is spending your whole life performing a version of yourself that was never real. So when the identity falls, don't rush to replace it. Let it rot. Let it die. And from that stillness, watch what grows. And what grows from that void, that's where things get interesting. Because when you stop being who the world told you to be, you get to ask the most dangerous question of all. What would I do if there was no applause waiting at the end? What if the point was never recognition, but doing the right thing with no guarantee of reward? We live in a world obsessed with results, metrics, outcomes, performance reviews, social media likes, job titles. Everyone wants to know, what do I get if I do this? But here's a brutal truth. Not every action comes with a reward. Not every effort is seen. Not every sacrifice is celebrated. And that's exactly where Žižek points us to something deeper. He calls it the value of commitment without guarantees. A radical form of integrity. A way of living that isn't about applause, but about alignment. Doing what's right, even when no one's watching. Even when it doesn't pay off. Especially then. Think of the teacher who stays after school to help a struggling student, knowing it won't count toward a promotion. Or the nurse who holds a dying patient's hand, long after the shift has ended. Or the delivery driver who still smiles after a 12-hour day and 0 tips. These aren't viral stories, they don't get medals, but they are acts of real, quiet courage. In Žižek's philosophy, these moments matter more than any grand gesture, because they come from a place that's not seeking validation. They come from a deeper core, the kind of ethical backbone that consumer culture tries to erase. And here's where it gets complicated. In a system built on incentives, doing something without expecting a return feels foolish. We're taught that effort should equal outcome, but real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes you give everything, your time, your energy, your heart, and get nothing back. No recognition, no raise, no thank you, just silence. And the question becomes, are you still willing to do it? To show up, to try, even if the world never claps for you? That's not weakness, That's strength most people don't understand. Žižek argues that meaning isn't something you find. It's something you create through repetition, through showing up every single day for what matters, especially when it hurts, especially when it's invisible. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to keep going. Not because it makes you rich or famous, but because it makes you human. This isn't about martyrdom. It's about dignity. The kind that's earned in private, in silence with no audience, just you and the weight of your own choices. And maybe that's what's missing in the endless hustle for success. A space where action isn't transactional, where love isn't earned through likes, where work isn't just a means to a paycheck, but an expression of your soul. It sounds abstract, until you remember the moments where you did something kind, something brave, and nobody knew. And somehow, that made it more real, more sacred. Žižek isn't interested in feel-good philosophy. He's interested in what remains when the applause stops. And for many of us, that's the only thing we can trust anymore. So what does it mean to live like that? It means choosing the honest path, not the glamorous one. It means turning down shortcuts that sell your integrity for convenience. It means staying loyal to what matters, even when your bank account, your friends, or the algorithm doesn't reward you for it. That's not failure. That's resistance. In a culture obsessed with instant feedback, acting without guarantees is a quiet revolution, one most people never notice. But you will feel it in your bones. If this hits home, it's because you've probably been living this way without even realizing it. You've shown up for people who never thanked you. You've tried your best in jobs that barely paid the bills. You've done right by others even when it cost you. That's not weakness. That's the blueprint for a different kind of life. A life where your value isn't determined by results, but by your refusal to betray yourself. Žižek doesn't offer you a trophy. He offers you something better. The chance to reclaim your time, your energy, and your actions as sacred. And when you start living that way, when you choose your values over visibility, something unexpected happens. You begin to realize that failure isn't the enemy. In fact, there's something strangely liberating about failing on purpose. About choosing to try with your whole heart, knowing it might not work. Because maybe, just maybe, the purpose isn't to win. Maybe it's to lose, beautifully, honestly, for something that truly matters. Nobody talks about the kind of failure that sets you free. The kind you walk into with your eyes open, knowing it might break you, but choosing it anyway. Žižek calls this the ethics of failure, not the failure of apathy, but the sacred failure of those who dare to care. We're taught to fear losing, to avoid it at all costs. But what if real freedom doesn't come from success, but from choosing something worth failing for? Not to win, but to live, to stand for something, to become someone who doesn't measure their life in victories, but in honesty. Think about it. Every system you've ever been part of, school, work, even relationships, rewards you for outcomes. Get the grades, land the job, hit the target, make it look good. But where's the reward for showing up even when you're exhausted? Where's the reward for risking your pride to do the right thing? There isn't one. That's the trap. That's what Žižek wants us to see. Success is often just well-packaged conformity. But failure, chosen failure, that's rebellion. That's where the soul begins to breathe. Maybe you already know this in your bones. Maybe you've pursued art, or activism, or kindness, and watched it go unnoticed. Maybe you've chosen to stay soft in a world that profits from hardness. Maybe you've lost relationships, money, even opportunities because you refuse to sell yourself. If so, you're not broken. You're brave. Žižek would say, you've stepped outside the hedonic treadmill, that endless loop of chasing highs and avoiding discomfort. You've stepped into a different arena, where the point is no longer to be admired, but to be real. This isn't an invitation to romanticize suffering. It's a call to reject the illusion that only what succeeds is worth doing. The artist who paints for no one. The writer whose words stay in drafts. The caregiver who sacrifices without recognition. These lives aren't failures. They're acts of resistance in a world obsessed with display. When you fail for something you love, and I mean truly love, you plant a seed. Maybe it never grows, but the act of planting it changes you. And that change, it's irreversible. So ask yourself, what would I be willing to fail at every day for the rest of my life if I knew it was the right thing? Not the profitable thing, not the popular thing, the right thing. Žižek doesn't give us easy answers. He gives us mirrors. And when we look into them, honestly, we see how many of our choices were made out of fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being nothing. But what if being nothing in their system is exactly what makes you whole? To fail on purpose is not to quit. It's to choose depth over appearance. Reality over spectacle. When you decide to write the book that may never sell, raise a child that may never thank you, or serve a community that may never vote for you, you're saying something dangerous. You're saying, I no longer need your permission to matter. That's power. That's spiritual. That's the kind of quiet revolution this world is desperate for, but too distracted to see. You've been taught your whole life to fear the words, you failed. But what if failure is the only honest answer in a dishonest game? What if the world only wins when it convinces you to stop trying? And what if the real success is not winning their race, but walking off the track altogether and building something slower, messier, but true? When Žižek talks about living with purpose, he isn't talking about clarity. He's talking about devotion. The willingness to keep showing up, even when the light at the end of the tunnel turns out to be a train. And maybe that is the question you've been circling this whole time. If I stop chasing the version of me that everyone approves of, who do I become? What's left when I stop performing? What's born when I stop trying to win? So now you know. Maybe it's not about fixing yourself. Maybe it's about seeing clearly. The illusions, the noise, the false promises, and finally choosing to live anyway. To fail with purpose, to act without guarantees, to rebuild yourself not as a brand, but as a human being, messy, honest, awake. The world may never reward you for that, but you weren't born to be rewarded. You were born to be real. So let me ask you, what would you keep doing even if nobody clapped? What would you fight for, even if it broke you? What would you still believe in, even if the world stopped believing in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Say it out loud. Let someone else see the truth you've been carrying alone. And if this video spoke to something you've been afraid to name, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications. This space is for people like you, the ones who question everything, the ones who feel too much, the ones who are ready to live outside the script. Because this isn't just a video, it's a quiet revolution.